That's right. As a special tribute to the dearly departed Leonard Nimoy, we're doing our retro game this week is the SNES Starfleet Academy game, which I actually played. I was very sick. I'd broken my toe when I was in primary school. It was year 6. I did it at a swimming carnival, and we hired from the video store a Super Nintendo, and this was the game that I chose, and I played it for a whole bunch of time. We also hired a whole bunch of Star Trek videos. This 8-bit music is super loud. I'm just going to turn it down a bit. So, I am actually familiar with this game. We're going to go through here, make up a little dude. You can be a male or a female, which again, that's a huge deal for such an early game. You get to change your name, not that it matters too much, and sort of change your skill level, and then you jump straight in. This video is going to talk a little bit about culture. It's going to talk a little bit about the actual video game that we're watching right now. So, we're probably going to jump back and forth through this. Man, that 8-bit soundtrack is really loud. Alright, so, yes, so the basics of the game, you are a young recruit coming into Starfleet Academy, and it tells you about all this stuff that you need to know. It gives you the tutorials, and you slowly work through missions. Most of the missions are actually space simulation, which is pretty amazing for this time. Like, it's using a primitive 3D engine. You can see here we are in the ship. Welcome, cadets. You're in a Mark IV Oberth class. Again, all these ships were legit. Like, they're legit Star Trek stuff. It's a big deal. So, it's pretty good. If you're a fan of the original series, the movies and stuff like that, this came out sort of when the next gen was just coming into its thing. So, and it takes a little while to work out what everything does, so we just play with the controls. It's pretty straightforward. You can see the little radar down the bottom there. It actually tells you what stuff's above you and below you because of the arrows, and what's straight ahead and behind you and stuff like that. So, it is using some 3D ideas, right? It's probably not legit 3D, but, back in the day, on a console, this was insane, Insane to have 3D space combat. And also, obviously, we've got that tiny little window that we're actually seeing out of, but that's very reminiscent of the show, It's tied so much in. You've got these yellow dudes who are, like the yellow shirted dudes, which again, that's Starfleet recruiting stuff. Like, they've paid so much attention to little details, and I think that's what made this game a really big success. But we're not just here to talk about the game today. So, like I said, I'd like to take a minute to, you enjoy the game. I'm going to have a little discussion here about Leonard Nimoy, who just this weekend passed away from complications from his long-term illness due to smoking and things like that. Don't smoke, kids. I know there's lots of my students now listening. But let's talk to the students for a second. Like, you kids will never understand what it's like to grow up being a little bit nerdy and not have any role models, right? Like, at the moment, Geek Chic is in, and it's totally cool to know about Batman and all the Batman characters, and, watch Star Wars and Star Trek and know the difference between a Miranda class and an Oberth class and a Constellation class and a Constitution class starship in Star Trek. And, like, that stuff is, there are pockets of society where that is pretty cool to know that stuff. You probably have seen someone on, TV that claims to be able to speak Klingon, and that's kind of, that character is celebrated in their nerdiness. I'm thinking things like The Big Bang Theory. I'm thinking things like all the different movies and stuff. It's, a huge deal. It's a huge deal to have all these role models. But not that long ago, so I'm not much older than the kiddies that I teach that are on here listening to me from time to time. And, you know, anyone my age can tell you, this is a new thing to have these role models, right? It's a brand new thing to have people to look up to that in the mainstream popular culture, right? And as a result, you know, like, we didn't have a lot of people. So, like, Leonard Nimoy playing Spock was one of the very few, like, solid role models for people like us, right? I mean, you had the people in the 90s, you know, things like Harry Kim and, you know, Captain Janeway and Captain Sisko and all the rest of it, Captain Picard. But, like, you know, with maybe the exception of Captain Picard and Data, you didn't really have such prominent characters as Kirk and Spock, you know? And Spock is a nerd. Like, he's a super nerd. He's a scientist. He's not violent. Well, he has violent ability, but he, you know, controls his emotions and stuff like that. Like, that whole Vulcan ideology that Leonard Nimoy put forth was such a huge, you know, deal for nerdy kids who they didn't want a violent resolution to their conflict and stuff like that. So understanding that because of this man, this one dude who now sadly has passed, you know, he's probably one of the single most influential people from nerd culture. And if it wasn't for him, so much of the stuff that we have today could not have existed. Like, just think about the sheer number of people who maybe got into you know, nerdy subjects like sciences and computing and all that stuff just because they dug Star Trek and they dug science and Spock made it cool to be okay with that, you know? Like, this is such a big player in our history of the world, you know? And look at all the actors who got into sci-fi because of him, you know? Look at all the actors who were influenced by his you know, acting ability and things like that. And you just, if it wasn't for this one guy, if this one guy didn't exist, literally our entire planet would be very different right now. We would have such a really, you know, different way of life to what we currently have. And because of that, that's, you know, that's something that I guess he paved the way for nerds to then come out and start making nerd culture okay, now that, you know, kids that grew up with that and they raise their kids on nerd culture, and now, like, we're like third or fourth generation in, you know. The fact that you've got this such ridiculously detailed Star Trek game is yet another example of why that is, you know, like how that is the case. Like, look at the sheer detail that's gone into this little game, you know. This is on the SNES. It's, what's that, like 16-bit, 32-bit, something quite low. It's not spectacular, and it's well, it's spectacular for its time, but, like, it's, you know, look at that 3D rendering of a combat drone. You know, it's a big deal for its time, and it was a big deal for, you know, I guess people who were into this stuff, because, like, holy cow, man, now we can fly these ships and etc., etc. And that influences then obviously the culture. The kids that get into that stuff are now the adults that make films and make games themselves. Think of, you know, like the other games that I play. Like, I have the X3 game, which, you know, again, it's a space combat simulation, and it's not that much dissimilar from this sort of a game, you know. And a lot of the things that exist in society are inspired by these ideals and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm jumping all over the place here. My point is that the young kids of today will never understand what it's like to have, like, no role models. You know, even you know, I'm like in my late 20s, coming up on 30s, and it's such a you know, different, like, you know, knowing that I had those examples, people like Leonard Nimoy, meant that it was okay for me to be like, whatever, man. And, you know, I think back to my dad's era. Obviously, you know, he was a little kid when this stuff was coming out, and he's the one that introduced it to me. You know, I remember sitting with my with my dad watching the original series of Star Trek. I remember him, fostering and encouraging my love of Star Trek. So here's what I was talking about. Like, these are all real ships. Like, that's a D7, that's a Romulan bird of prey. Like, all this stuff. That's another D7. Like, all this stuff exists, like, in the Star Trek universe. It's so detailed. Miranda class, that's one of my favorite class starships, and this is one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite classes, actually. Yeah, like, they put in the effort. Look at this. You're in a Romulan ship, and it's very different. This is what Romulan ship look like in the show. Not that you see much of them, but yeah. So anyway, back to my point. Kids, they don't get it. I'm lucky to have had this as a role model. My dad was lucky to have this as a role model. It's people like this that are breaking open society. Now, if you look at the character of Spock, like, how much stuff is he responsible for? Like, he was one of the first sort of peaceful, just peace-based characters. Even, like, Leonard Nimoy invented a whole bunch of stuff for the show, like the neck pinch. He was meant to, like, bash the dude in the head with his gun. And he was like, you know what? I don't think that Spock, who's, like, this logical, emotionless alien, would want to do that. He's not a violent dude. Maybe he's probably studied the anatomy, and he has this telepathic power through his hands and stuff anyway, which we've already established through, like, mind melds and junk. So what if, instead of bashing the dude, he, like, finds a weak point in his nervous system and, like, shocks him with his telepathy? And the dudes were like, oh, yeah, whatever, maybe, what are you talking about? And he grabbed, William Shatner and was like, here you go, we're going to do it now. And Shatner totally went on board with it and did that. But, like, if it wasn't for that, Spock would have just been an alien that totally smashes into dudes and punches on, and it would have been a very different kind of character, And he also was a great guy in general. Like, he argued that, Walter Koenig and Nichelle Nichols should totally have full pay as well. Like, he looked after his co-stars. He was such a great dude, and he drastically changed the society because of just being a great guy. And if you think of all the generations of kids who's grown up and known who Spock is, whether it be from the original series or whether it be from the next generation or the movies or the movies in the 70s or the the modern films, even the last ones, which whatever you feel about New Trek, even that is a big deal, like you still see him in there. He's a big important character. So yeah, alright, so I just got smoked pretty badly, so we're gonna switch these ships up. I might take a chunky ship and go after a little ship. Again, this is what the Reliant sort of looks like, lots of attention to detail. And you know what? He wasn't just playing like this stereotypical character. If you actually go back and watch the original series, like, yeah, okay, fair enough. The graphics might be a bit less on point, and the acting is pretty hammy, and compared to what we're used to, it's not as dramatic. But if you look at how he portrayed Spock, it was a really dynamic character. He wasn't just like, I'm emotionless and I don't care and whatever. He played a very subtle character. Sometimes the character did care. He did have emotions. And, Nimoy was responsible for throwing that sort of, deciding how to throw those lines out. So, did he come across as, superior and arrogant? That in itself is an emotion. And the way that he plays Spock is such a subtle transition. Like, you can see Spock does have emotions because he's a half Vulcan, half human. He still has these things in him. And the way that he, maintains that is really cool. Look, I'm going to go to Balance of Terror. That's one of my favorite episodes from the original series. I'm probably going to do a terrible job. The idea is it's Romulans on the neutral zone. You've got to try. This is the first episode in the original series where you discover Romulans have cloaking technology. It was like one of the really pivotal points. Also, I haven't taken any time to talk about this amazing interface here. Like, you've got so many options for such a simple game. It's got such a complex menu system and space simulation system. I could play this game for literally hours. I won't do that. I've already rambled on for like a solid 15 minutes, so we're going to do this mission. I'll probably mess it up because it's been a long time since I played. And then once we've done that, we'll wrap this up. So, yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, he plays such a subtle character. The world would not be the same if it wasn't for Leonard Nimoy. So, kids, if you're watching, adults, if you're watching, just take a second to really think about how this world would be different if it wasn't for the influence of a peaceful, non-violent alien who's responsible for, controlling his emotions and thinking things through rather than reacting. And, how that influenced individuals in society just through pop culture. And then think, what would the world be like if it wasn't for Leonard Nimoy in the first place? Like, if he took up the accordion like his dad wanted and never got into filmmaking. Like, what could this world be like if you didn't have generations of kids who were like, hang on a second, this dude's peaceful, and rather than using his brawn by punching dudes in the head with a gun, he uses his brain and gives it a neck pinch and stuff, like... How would the world be different? Take that time. Take a minute of silence to think about that and stuff. I've just gone into the neutral zone. We might call that an end to this thing. And yeah, take that time. Think about it. So, yeah. Thanks, guys. And live long and prosper, my friends.